go. I am very pleased and very honored to welcome Dr. Amelia Parnell, the Vice President of Research and Policy for NASPA, to join us today to talk about student affairs. Um, she's got a great presentation lined up for us. Dr. Howard, did you have any additional invitation that you would like to make?
No, I just would like to say special thanks to your work, Davis, and also thanks for taking the time to share with us today. I'm excited to hear your presentation. As you know, we've been talking about the changing foundation of student affairs, and sometimes it's always better to hear it from someone else, right, as opposed to hearing it from someone who's among you and with you every day. I think we're in a situation where there's going to be in the next couple of years some major changes within higher ed, and this is just kind of a snapshot or a sample or however you want to call it, like an appetizer for what's to come. So I'm excited to hear. We've talked a lot about that leading up to this presentation, and so there again, thank you, Dr. Parnell, for being with us today, and hopefully you'll find this beneficial as I will.
Well, I think that leaves it just to me. I just want to make sure I'm watching the time correctly. So we have an hour and a half together. Is that right? Something about that? Okay, so I'll work backwards in assuming that you all want to do any closing announcements or next steps. So let's say we leave the last 10 minutes and I probably get to have the first hour and 20 minutes or another hour and 17 minutes. And I think we probably will use up all of that. So first things first, I just want to say some thank you. So David, thank you for being my primary point of contact. This part is always smoother when you have a chance to do everything from tech run throughs to sound checks and stuff like that. You all were in the waiting room and I was trying to figure out how to get my two screens to show up correctly, things you don't ever see, but thank you, David. I appreciate that. Dr. Howard, thank you for letting me have the stage. I heard that this is going to be the first of several professional development opportunities. And so I realized that you all have a plan in place and I'm happy to be able to kick this off. And thank you for thinking of me. And if you happen to see Benita Brown, tell her I said hello. I really appreciate that connection. And then I think next, just thank you to all of you. So Tiffany, I know you said you're the only human in the office. Thanks for coming to the office. Thanks for all of you who chose to come today. I know you got a lot going on. If you're anything like me, you're just still trying to balance this work from home versus go to the office thing. And you just got a lot of stuff going on. So I also realized that when you're listening to someone speak for an hour, there's that point where you're thinking, what's next? How much longer is it? Where's the part that's for me? And so in advance, I asked David if he would send some questions to me that some of you might have. And so I got 4 of them. I didn't get names attached, so I can't give attributions, but hopefully if you sent one of the 4, you'll see your question in the slides. And so let me start by sharing my screen, make sure this practice work that I just hyped up about with David works correctly. So I'm going to do the presentation view. Can you all see a headline slide that says the intersection of theory and practice in student affairs? David, I see you on my screen. So if you do a thumbs up, I'll know that you got it. Okay. Before we get into it, let me give you a couple things to keep in mind. This will be just like a buffet. So, Dr. Howard, I know you use the analogy of an appetizer. Think of this as that buffet where you can really go across a lot of different dishes and get a little bit of everything. So I got some research in here. I got some stats in here. I got some current trends in here. I got a couple future predictions in here. Got some advice in here. And I got your questions in here. And so I promise I've organized it in a way that doesn't look haphazard, but instead is a little bit of something for everybody. And so it should take us quite a bit of time before we're done, but I think we probably right around the top of the hour or so, I should be wrapping up and I can take some questions from you all, which is my favorite part of any of these. I just want to say thank you again. It's equally as beneficial for me to talk with you all so that I can get a sense of what's happening on the ground. So if in the meantime you got questions, I think maybe David, if you can keep an eye on those for me in the chat, if you got reactions, we can see those on my screen. I can't see them come in, but we can keep track of them. So if something strikes your interest, feel free to put it in there. We'll keep track of it. All right, so I want to start here. I titled this The Intersection of Theory and Practice in Student Affairs, How to Balance Purpose, Priorities, and Planning. And that picture to the left, to me, kind of captures. So I didn't realize we were going to go on this food theme so early, but I want to go there. So I have picked up baking. I've always enjoyed it, but during the pandemic, I've had a chance to do that a little bit more. You all might have heard about flour shortages and things like that. I would liken this intersection of theory and practice to baking in some regard. So theory in and of itself provides a nice foundation, like a really nice recipe. Not perfect, but you can adjust it. You can take a little bit of one recipe, blend it with another. Practice is when you actually put the ingredients together. And if the goal there, or the balance of priorities, planning, and purpose, is to make a muffin, like that muffin pan up there, All of this together spread out on the counter won't get it done, but you got to figure out what's the right balance, what's the right mix of ingredients, what's the right procedure, what's the right process. One day you think you're making blueberry muffins, but what happens when you run out of blueberries? What happens if you're making muffins for somebody who can't have flour or they're gluten-free in their diet? And so I think we're in that point now with student affairs. There's a lot of foundational things that we know, but then there are a lot of practical things that we need to do. And so finding that balance can be a little bit challenging, but it leaves some opportunities. So here's the agenda I put together for you. David did a very brief bio, but I'm going to tell you a few things that are not in my bio should you have Googled me or heard about the work at NASPA. So I'll tell you a little bit about NASPA with the disclaimer that I will not be handing out applications for membership or anything like that, but just to truly give you a sense of where I work and how I came about these things I'm going to share with you. First of which will be some current trends. And so things that I've seen over the last year, a lot of it will be heavily influenced by the pandemic, but also some things prior to the pandemic. And then from there, if we're talking about the intersection of theory and practice, I have some things that I'd like to suggest we remember or keep in mind, and then 3 specific practical strategies for doing so. And because Dr. Howard mentioned specifically student development theory, I thought I would do a spotlight on 2 of my favorite theories and researchers who are doing that. From there, I think we'll be close to the top of the hour, so I'll leave you with some advice for the future if you're trying to continue this work, as well as 4 of my favorite resources. And then again, questions throughout. You'll see 4 dedicated slides with questions from your peers in there, and then we'll have some time at the end if you have additional questions. So that is the run of show. All right, so a little bit about me, things you won't see in my bio, but that definitely heavily influence how I go about my daily work and how I engage with all of you. The first is up there in the top left. That's me and my twin sister. So we grew up in rural Lake City, Florida. If you're familiar with Lake City, then you know exactly where it is. If you're not, then that's where I-10 and I-75 intersect. It's about 20 minutes right from the Georgia border. David, I see you clapping. That must mean you know where it is. On a farm. That means we literally grew up shucking corn and picking peas and getting chickens, eggs, and things like that. And it taught me, of course, how to get on a schedule and be proactive with my time. But it taught me a lot about community. And a lot of times we would share a lot of what we had with neighbors and things of that sort. That picture of me with the goat, that's not on our farm. That's at the zoo. And that is me trying to pick up the goat. Now, I don't know what I would have done with the goat had I gotten it, but my mom says that my personality is typically one of an optimist, which means that nobody told me I couldn't. And so I thought that I would try it. And of course, the goat stayed at the zoo. But my mindset is that I'm an eternal optimist. I like to try new things. The bottom left is to acknowledge that we're in a pandemic and everything is different, including my hair. And my optimistic nature was for me to try to cut my own hair. It didn't go well. Another story for another time. And the bottom right is that I always like giving back. I like opportunities to speak with new people. I created a podcast over the summer. I like talking about college. And so that's really my appeal to all of you, that if you like any of what we're talking about and you want to continue the conversation, I'll put my email address at the end of the slides. Write me anytime. I truly enjoy engaging. If you got an article you want to suggest or something that you want to know, I hope that this will be my first chance to meet you, but that we can continue the conversation. I offer it all the time. Rarely does anybody ever take me up on it, but truly feel free to keep in touch. So a little bit about NASPA. I'm assuming most of you all working in student affairs, you've heard of it. So this is the boilerplate slide that I have to put here. In 100 years of history, we've seen a lot across a lot of sectors of higher education, specifically in student affairs. And I think you know what we do. But what I can tell you about NASPA is that right now, we're in transition like most other campuses, trying to figure out what the future of student affairs is going to hold. What does it mean for us to be in this profession, not just now, but for the next decade or 2 decades? And so though this text on here is all the things you recognize, I enjoy conversations about the future of student affairs. And I have a lot of that in these next few slides, which I'm titling What's Going On. And so right now, if you read the Chronicle, if you read Inside Higher Ed, if you read Higher Education Dive, any of the news outlets, your local news outlets, there's a lot going on regarding the future and current state of higher education. So I'm gonna start macro and talk about higher education since that's our area of focus, but then I'm gonna go more micro and specifically talk about student affairs and what I'm seeing. All right, so these are 5 questions. The first is, how are institutions preparing for their financial stability over the next 2 to 3 years? No shocker there. I think as soon as we start talking about the enrollment cliff that everybody thinks is happening in 2025 to just truly budgets and the CARES Act funding, a lot of that, everybody's asking about the financial stability. Doesn't mean our school's going to close largely, but just in general, our operations needing to shift so swiftly and so dramatically. What does that mean for stability in general? In a completely different direction, free speech and safety. We just had an election, a new president that got inaugurated in January, and a lot of things happened around that. That trickles down into higher education about free speech. You've probably seen some of the legislation being proposed in Florida, for example, about what students can do with their professors and being able to record them and put forth views that they agree with or don't agree with. And so I think that that's going to be huge for us in higher education and specifically student affairs. The third one is where we are right now. How does the COVID-19 temporary and permanent shifts, how does that look for residential campus operations? How do we do virtual career services, but then come back to in-person career services? Same thing could be said for advising and orientation, things that make the in-person experience so special being different. Fourth, if we know that students are learning in blended and virtual environments, how are we actually going to monitor that? How do we know what they're learning? We know what they can be tested on in terms of assessments, but other learning types are happening as well. And what do we do with that? How are going to be our strategies? What are going to be our strategies, and how are we going to do that going forward? And then lastly, if that's not enough, pick any day of the week in a headline and somebody's still asking that question about the value of a college experience. And so that trickles down into our work in student affairs. We're trying to make the case that it's still worth it, it's still expensive. Any question about student loan debt or the student loan debt crisis, somebody's going to bring that counter argument of are tens of thousands of dollars too much money to spend on college? I think it's worth it, but others maybe not so convinced. All right, so that's the macro. And I promise we're going to come to a place of light so that this doesn't depress you, overwhelm you, like, oh, give us all these hard questions. So the micro questions specific to student affairs, how are divisions realigning the financial and personal resources across functional areas? And so this is not just exclusively about getting leaner. I know that some campuses experience furloughs or reductions in staff and things like that. But truly, if we're trying to align and be more cross-functional and even more collaborative, how are we actually designing our financial resources and our personnel resources to do so? The next, how are we providing emergency support for students? I think something that came out of this pandemic is that we were already talking about food pantries, we're already talking about housing insecurity, but CARES Act funding illuminated another set of conversations about how to turn real-time resources into delivery for students within 24 hours, maybe and sometimes less than that. Career preparation. I hear that come up a lot, specifically about the goal of completing a credential, but then also entering the workforce. How are we managing career preparation, not just in terms of career services, but embedding that in all facets of what students are doing in the classroom, outside the classroom, with peers, and so on and so forth. And I'll just drop the last two. Racial inequities and injustice, this could be a whole separate presentation. I need not give you the backdrop of what's happening in the country, but there are places where higher education institutions are going to be asked to address these issues and specifically create a space for leading change in some ways. A lot of people saying they want to get educated, they want to get more well-versed in the topics. They would probably lean on higher education to do that. And I imagine those who have titles and profiles that work in areas of equity, inclusion, and social justice, diversity and equity and inclusion, oftentimes live or are housed in student affairs. And then lastly, back to the same question, similar to the previous one, delivering programs and services in a blended or virtual learning environment. So this combination of 10 questions honestly could keep us busy for a while. Now, this is the current state, but I think going forward in the future, this leaves a lot of room to talk about student development theory and the future of student affairs. And we have some work going on at NASPA and with collaboration with others too. So just to sum it up, the past year, frequent focus areas. If I'm truly answering a lot of calls from anybody on college campuses, our members write a lot about this stuff. These are the 8 areas among many more that I think are frequently focused on. I imagine if you're in one of these areas, you have heard and seen and talked a lot about a lot of these things. So this is truly just to validate and say, when I said thank you for coming, I mean in the middle of all this stuff on this slide, thank you for showing up. There's a lot going on. So we could just truly pick one. Student conduct, new Title IX regulations got passed in August of last year. And there's still a lot of campuses that are saying, do we have to keep them? Do we really have to do that? Is this going to be rescinded? It's like, no, this is actually the rule. There are probably lots more conversations with the new administration that are going to happen. But in the meantime, you still have to get up to speed on what's going to be required. And there's a lot there that some have issue with and want to take, a different direction for. I definitely can say everything around contact tracing. We've all become experts in that. I think much more than we probably expected to, but that totally turns into counseling and mental health services as well as it relates to health records, HIPAA requirements. What can you do across state lines? What are going to be your telehealth options? If you are doing contact tracing, who gets access to that type of information? So again, this is the last part of where I can say I would overwhelm us, but this is the backdrop of what we're talking about. And I want to show you a little bit about my kind of national perspective and what I keep hearing. If this resonates with you, just know that you're not alone. If this does not resonate with you, give me a call because I want to know how you've been able to get out of this space and not deal with what most of your colleagues have. So with that in mind, we did a survey in May of last year where we truly titled it, like, what are student affairs perceptions, professionals' perceptions of the COVID-19 pandemic on campus shifts and needs and priorities? And these things might touch on your lived experience. So now we're going to go even more micro. So first, 75% said they thought it was difficult to work remotely. And that means communications around just difficulties on Zoom versus WebEx versus Microsoft Teams and every other meeting platform that you might have. Balancing mental health and just the strain of being away from the office and colleagues, managing family responsibilities, things like that. Suitable work locations. You all can see my living room behind me. Am I okay with that? Some might be, some might be not. But more professional development, this idea that we used to talk about professional development in terms of settings like this, which I'm very happy for. But many people said, how do I actually facilitate a virtual meeting with 30 people? I would love some training on how to actually use breakout rooms effectively. I would love to know how to do video production. If I want to add closed captioning, and how do I engage with an interpreter, all types of things like that. Many said that they think that even when we get back into the fall or the spring, that virtual practices are probably going to continue. So how to engage with social media in a virtual way? How do you engage with students via digital chat rooms and things of that sort? So um, much like what I shared with the previous slides, the concern about the future of higher education still there. Their own institution stability, sustainability, even scalability. How can we still do all of what we were previously doing? Which things can we stop doing? That was a big question too. Did the pandemic actually give us permission to stop doing some things? And then lastly, many said that they were actually concerned about quality. So this quick shift to virtual, many said, I want to go back to business as usual because I knew that when we were in person, we could do it well. Doing it virtually, some start to ask, is this going to actually help us do this efficiently and effectively? Not quite sure. And so there's a lot in here, but over 1,600 professionals gave us these sentiments. So this includes your large campuses, small campuses, 2-year, 4-year, public, private, regional comprehensive institutions. So I feel like this is a pretty good swath of what everybody would say is top of mind. So enough about what I would probably say I've heard. Here's the first question from one of you all. It says, how do you recommend we integrate student development theory with our work? So spoiler alert, whoever asked this question, we get to see it twice. So we're going to start here. This is going to be the frame of the whole presentation. And then I'm going to come back to this question at the very end with some specific practical advice. So my first response is this. So I started looking around, pulling out some books and stuff on student development theory. Side note, I really enjoyed this. I haven't actually had a chance to dig into it this much, but it's been good. But this is a quote here from the book. And this is kind of what people refer to as the green book. So if you've been using student development theory or you've taken a class, you might remember it. It's Forney and Wren and Lori Patton Davis and others. But this quote kind of sums it up. It says, from the paternalistic faculty authority figure who supervised Harvard students in 1936 to the contemporary student affairs professional, I put this part in red, who uses developmental theory to understand students' personal growth and learning, student development has always existed in some form as a goal of educators. And I think this puts down the foundation of why we're looking at this. So if you were thinking, why student development theory? Student development theory has been in place since the beginning. And it doesn't matter if you're specifically or exclusively in student affairs, or you're in the faculty, or you're in the registrar's office. To use a frame of student development theory seems like the most appropriate approach right now, given the changing time. So Dr. Howard, I just want to say thank you again for using this frame. I think it's relevant and it's timely for what we're trying to do. I think before we get into a specific conversation about student development theory, I have 4 things that, as I was preparing these slides, that I think we should keep in mind. The first is that every student's journey is ever evolving. And so when you're thinking about student development theory, you'll probably see things that are like phased approaches or staged theories. Things like, let's say, using that same baking analogy, I've never had blueberries. And I say off the top, I don't like blueberries. And I can't be convinced otherwise until I meet a friend who's a baker and really likes baking with blueberries. And then I become exposed to blueberries, try them for the first time, really enjoy them, like them so much that now I'm making my own recipes and I'm telling everybody blueberries are special. I'm using health properties and talking about them being a superfood. That phased or staged approach, something that says when you go from unawareness to awareness to advocacy, is very common. You could take that same approach and use it for student development theory in the area of digital identity development, or one's political identity development, or any other one. Those are good. But I think just as important as those that take us through or move through transitions are the ones that say the student actually doesn't have to move. The things around the student are changing. And that would be our ecological theories, things that you would say, hey, if the student stays right at the center, what's going on around them? What's happening in the environment that we should be looking at? And how do we as student affairs professionals address that environment to make it better? And so what I would say here is that because each student's journey is ever evolving, I would caution us from using one single theory to apply to every situation, or to go and find a situation and say, I just need to find the theory about how to approach it. They're helpful. They provide a nice recipe, something to consider, but it's not perfect. And so what I would say is that though our core responsibilities remain, new opportunities and challenges are emerging. And so one of the resources at the end of this slideshow is going to be a brand new book that came out this year. And I don't even know if they planned it, the timing to be this way, but it's a new take on student development theory. And it's filled with brand new theories that address things that are more contemporary and dealing with student affairs as of today. The third is that I think it's important for us to look at more than just outcomes. It's very tempting to say, how did that program that we developed for transfer students 2 years ago, how's it going? How many students have been coming? Of those students who came, did they graduate on time? Of those students who came, did they have an average GPA of 3.5 or higher? If it were not the case, then maybe we should not do the program anymore. Now, again, if you're on this call and you're in charge of transfer student services, this is not me pointing a finger at you. Swap out transfer student services, insert new student programs. What I would say is that's good. Outcomes always get attention. And when you're talking about funding, you need that. But I would encourage us to not just look at outcomes, but also look at process assessments and needs assessments. Understanding the core needs of what you're trying to develop and the process by which you deliver them also come with data. And looking at those, I think, would help us get to the student development theory part even more precisely. And then lastly, just a shameless plug for us, ourselves as individuals. Students are learning and they're going through different types of development, but so are we. I think we're figuring out our own digital identities right now. Deciding to go to the office versus stay at home totally affects how you might approach your work and how you would engage with others. And so those are kind of the caveats, 4 things to keep in mind before now we get into what I would say are the 3 strategies to answer the question. So there are 3 things that I think that we can do to specifically integrate student development theory in our work. They're bottom shelf. They probably won't surprise you, but there's a lot that I can say around each one of these. And so the 3 are to first set clear goals. And for example, I'm going to talk about student success. I think we're in that place where those student success, I feel like might be taking its journey into a space of equity and inclusion and social justice. Every campus that says they have a student success focus or mission or goal is going to be talking about what they mean by student success. How does student success show up for Northern Kentucky? What is it that would signal to us that we've reached that goal or in the direction of reaching that goal? The second one is prioritizing communication. Effective communication is essential. I think you know this, but I think that when it comes to integrating student development theory, being able to talk with yourselves as well as students about why you're doing what you're doing and what the intended outcomes are going to be is going to be the most critical thing you can do right now. Even more so than this last thing, which is to seek and share knowledge across each other. So David and I were talking before we let you all into the main room about this professional development series that you're doing and the opportunity to learn not just about each other's work, but work across the campus. And I think that gives you a chance to see that the foundation of collaboration is built on sharing what you know. Some of it is just truly, okay, tell me what you do in your day job, but some of it is truly problem solving, trying something in a new way that a colleague has learned. It saves you time. And so I have an example near the end of these slides that talks about your data identity. And I think I can make the case that we are all data people and that we all have a data identity. And when you figure out which type of identity you have, that helps you share and seek knowledge from others in a way that's really, really meaningful. So the rest of this presentation, back in the days when we used to be able to fly, I would say we are now starting and getting to 10,000 feet. So I'm going to take 3 sections of the presentation. One is going to be on setting clear goals, next one on communication, next one on seeking and sharing knowledge, and then we're going to wrap it up. So with setting clear goals, I want to say this. It seems to me that student success is everywhere. You know, we've seen it in positions, student success coach, director of student success. We've seen it in metrics, certain objectives and indicators, the mission of student success. There's an office on many campuses of student success, a student success center, campus-wide student success initiatives. I've been to student success summits, things of that sort. And when we say student success, I typically ask a campus, it could be in the division of student affairs or president, and ask them, when you say student success, what do you mean? Many of them say this. They'll say retention, persistence, or graduation, or some combination of the 3. How do you know a student was successful here? And they usually say, well, we've retained them at this rate, or we've been able to have them persist at that rate, or X% are graduating on time or within 6 years, something like that. And these are good. I think this is a nice foundation to start from, but I think that we can do more. I think that we take these 3 goals and we build on those. And so if setting clear goals is one way to infuse student development theory into our practice, there's more that I can say about that. Which brings me to the next question here. What are the most important theories to consider as part of our work in student affairs? I love this question because it gave me a chance to introduce one of the theories that I would say is a mainstay, and that's Schlossberg's transition theory. And so if you're familiar with it, it's one that I think we can apply in a lot of settings. If you're not familiar with it, I'll give you the basics. And so take this picture below as an analogy. So imagine being on a freeway back when you used to drive to work. If you're still getting back into it, there's a point where you're trying to merge into traffic, and then you're going to be going through traffic, and then you're going to get off the freeway. And so Schlossberg's transition theory is talking about how students move in and through certain situations, some that are expected, some that are not. Maybe you're in traffic and there's a traffic jam. Maybe you're in traffic and nothing at all is blocking your way, and you actually get to work or wherever you're going very early. Schlossberg's transition theory, I think, applies exceptionally well for setting clear goals, and here's why. because it's intended to be a framework that connects adults to the help that they need to cope with ordinary and extraordinary processes of living. So what that basically means is that she's talking about transitions as described by an event or a non-event, something that happens as a result of routines or relationships or assumptions. And so think about it like this. An event that most students would expect to happen is graduation, they would say, or completing of a credential, maybe a certificate. If it happens, then they're probably moving in the direction they expected. But what happens if they take a pause? What happens if they have to get a job? What happens if they have a health emergency? Or what happens if perhaps maybe the major of study that they were entering is going to be discontinued or something happens? It's in general a non-event. They did not finish. They did not stay in that major. They thought they wanted to be a biology major, but they had to switch to architecture, something like that. It changes the relationships that are around them. It changes their routines. It changes their assumptions. It changes the roles of the people who are involved in their day-to-day work. And when we say events, again, I mentioned that it would be a non-event or an event. It also could break down this way. Things that you expect to happen, I expect to enroll in semester after this. Unanticipated, not predicted or scheduled. I did not expect that I would have a tough assignment in one of my classes that was going to force me to work with somebody who has different political views as me, or non-events, back to the idea, something that I expected to happen or not happen. So when it comes to infusing student development theory into our daily work, and I make the case that clear goals would help, I think those clear goals play out in these four elements of the transition theory. So they're making the case, Schlossberg does, that these four things are imperative to keep in mind. One, sense of self, your own strategy that you use to move in and through situations. The support that you have around you, professors, student affairs professionals, those who are working in, the president's office, even if they have a new imperative. Is there a certain situation by which they would say everybody from the custodial staff to the dining services staff, that regardless of what situation the student is in, maybe today was that day that I changed my major, again, from biology to architecture. How can I find myself moving in and through events or non-events in a way that the strategies that are around me, the support that are around me, and my own sense of self would actually help me do that? So all that to say that when we say student success, we start with retention, persistence, and graduation. But I think we should evolve here. And I would suggest, this is just my own perspective, that there are additional things we can do to branch out our definition and make the goal clearer. One of which is to how to understand and balance competing individual and community priorities. As we see students on campus saying, my goal is to graduate, that should be a primary goal, to finish their degree and complete it. But as they do that and they engage with us in certain co-curricular activities, they learn about their unique contributions to the world and how to use their abilities to improve the conditions of others. I think a great example of that is the activism wave that we're seeing right now. When things happen in the country, many people have said they actually have learned more about how their individual presence on a campus impacts others. And so as a result, they want to do crowdsourced efforts. They want to do fundraising. They want to do marches and drives and canned food drives for those who are dealing with food insecurity, for example. So I think these three things, plus retention, persistence, and graduation, embedded in a transition theory, knowing that at any given time a student is moving in and through various events, helps us describe in a more clear fashion what the goal of us doing our best work might be. And so that's a long-winded way of saying item number one is to set clear goals. And I think Schlossberg's transition theory, the idea that any time a student is expecting certain events to happen and some events won't happen, and their way to navigate that and our strategies that we put around them can help us get to something like this that would be a much more expanded definition. So here, next question. In what ways do you see student development theory intersecting with our daily work? And I would put this sobering slide up here. 45% of students feeling so depressed that it was difficult for them to function in the past 12 months. 65% more feeling so overwhelmed, anxiety during the past 12 months that it might be difficult for them to function. Now, this is the 2019 ACHA National College Health Assessment. And what that means really is intersecting with our work means that much like we would be stressed out and a little bit overwhelmed with what's happening, and the news alone would probably get us. This is something that I think many more counseling center directors would probably agree with. And when I talk with VPs of student affairs and college presidents, I ask them what's the number one topic on minds of VPs and college presidents, they say mental health. And they say the way that we're going to handle this is going to be something that's going to be the long term, not the short term. And so I'm using the example of social injustice, but it could be something financial, it could be something academic. And the quote here from Sharon Mitchell is that if social justice contributes to poor mental health outcomes for people, even as professionals, we have to figure out how we speak to that and really validate it. Those are things that go into being proponents of mental health on the campus, not just dealing with the individual. And so with that in mind, I used the example earlier that on the very first slide about things to remember, that we have these staged approaches or phased approaches for student development theory. Schlossberg is like that. So you go from a phase of saying, hey, I'm moving on the pace to graduation if you're a student. And we as professionals are helping them. We're having them meet with advisors. We're talking about career planning, things of that sort. And then the non-event happens. Maybe they take a break. That phase approach, you can come back to it. They might take a break and they come back. So they're still moving in and through a process. But what happens when you have the student who's at the center and they're on pace, nothing has changed, but the environment around them has changed? And I would use that to say all of the racial injustice, the things that we see happening in the world do affect the student. Now, they don't move in and out of it so much as the world around them changes. And so how do we deal with that as student affairs professionals? What model could we look at that would help us acknowledge that if the student's at the center and we're a part of their environment, that we actually have roles to play? It's a good frame to use. And so I have my second of the two models, and this one is Bronfenbrenner. So if you are familiar with Urie Bronfenbrenner, Urie's model is an ecological systems theory model. And that model is to suggest that the student's at the center, but there are a lot of things happening around. So I would use this example of New York City. So if you've been to New York City, you've taken the train, you'll see that if you look at the map of New York City, shameless, admission here, I still don't have it together. If I were with you in New York City right now and you want to know how to get from Times Square to one of the boroughs, let's say Brooklyn, I can't help you. I would be right there at that map, just like you, looking at all these intersecting pieces here. Just to get on a train to go from the city to Brooklyn, there are a lot of things that have to happen in that environment that I cannot control. There has to be somebody driving the train. There has to be someone managing the tracks. There has to be someone managing the schedule. There has to be somebody watching security there. There has to be somebody who makes sure that the signage is matching what's there. All I'm doing is getting on the train. But if any one of those things in my environment changes, now I'm stuck on the train in a tunnel, I can't move. Or now I'm stuck packed in with somebody and I can't get off the train. So Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory model pushes us to think about not just the stages that the student would go through, like a slosh bird, but also the environment that we're creating for the student. So I could not seem to find a good diagram, and you all spare me critique. I'm not a design expert, but this is my reimagined version of this. And so I created this with clip art in Microsoft Word, but I think I can explain it in a way that would resonate with you. So if you can see this, that green circle in the middle is the individual. And the idea is that the individual will always be the point of focus here. But as you get farther around these circular bands, there are other systems at play that could impact the student's experience. So for example, the very first band that connects to the green, that light blue one, is the microsystem. So students are going to have in their microsystem people that really are going to be high contact with them: roommates, family, peers, neighbors if they're living in a residence hall. The people who are around them in their microsystem are the ones that they probably talk to most. Can you believe I was stuck on the train? Can you believe my advisor told me I shouldn't major in biology anymore? They're going to be sensing from their family and peers and others what to do. The next is the mesosystem. So basically that acknowledges that there are relationships between groups in the microsystem. What do my group of roommates, friends have to say? What do my aunts and uncles or my siblings have to say about what I'm doing? It acknowledges that there are groupings within your microsystem that probably push and pull on your decision making. The third is the exosystem. So that's that kind of orange band around there. Things that would affect an individual's life, but you don't have direct relationship with. So industry, local politics, things that might play out on the campus. Maybe there's a new honor code requirement. Maybe there's a requirement that everybody get testing for COVID, things like that. They don't get to be the decision maker, but it definitely affects how they go about campus life and things like that. And then the last one is the macro system. So these are things that are even farther from the student experience, but again, they impact how the students experience. So let's say that there's a mass shooting, unfortunately, or let's say there's a change to a particular law. Maybe there's something that happens within the state of Kentucky that they can't affect. Maybe something positive. Maybe they pass free community college and now the student can transfer into NKU. The idea is that at all times, the student is experiencing all of these systems around them. So one particular day, they may be having an issue that's really related to the legal system, which is part of their macro system, at the same time that they are arguing and in conflict with their roommate. And so we as student affairs professionals, understanding that we have to have our phase approaches, but our systems and ecology focus theories help us as well. There's not a perfect fit. Back to my earlier point, there is no one single theory that will help us address this. But I think using this frame to know that sometimes our approach could be to work on things that are in the environment. If we have enough students who all say, hey, I'm just having a difficult time navigating the housing process, then we can work on that. We can work on that part of the system for them. If another one is that, hey, I'm just having difficulty trying to change my major, now you got a transition thing. And so what I would say here is that I like these. I like the questions about which ones are the best. There is no best one, but try to keep in mind the difference between the phase ones and the ones that deal with the environment. All right, so now I said that I promised you 3 strategies. Number 2, and then notice I've hit you with some data, giving you some current trends. I hope y'all still with me. It's like a buffet. You've gotten a lot. It will overwhelm you or excite you or set the bar really high for whoever's coming next. So prioritize communication here. And in this case, I'm going to focus specifically on communication with students, but there's a lot more I could say about communication within a division of student affairs, within functions. But for this purpose, I think since we're talking about our service for the purpose of student success, however we define it, hopefully in a more clear and broad way, I would start here. This is a study from EAB. They had 70 administrators come together and talk about emails, and they found that 50% of students said they do not always read emails from their institution or academic department. That means 1 in 2, and that makes me shake my head. I'm thinking, my goodness. But then I have to also be realistic and say, I don't always read all the messages in real time. I leave them unread. I don't know what students are doing. But another 40% say they don't always read their emails from their advisors. And that's even more concerning to say if an advisor is writing you to tell you about your progress and inform you about something, why wouldn't you read that? And so NASPA, this is your first resource I want to leave with you. We did a project looking specifically at how student affairs divisions can communicate with students via email. And we found these 5 key factors. So it's a new study, came out, I think, fall of last year. And these are things you probably would expect, but the combination of these factors we think would make that interaction with students via email much more beneficial, I think, probably on both sides. So things I would probably highlight for your awareness here on the screen without reading all of them to you is actually the 4th one around pairing email with other modalities. I think a lot of campuses now are going around with this notion of how to infuse chatbots. And so knowing that students don't necessarily have to have live conversation, they could do some artificial intelligence type of thing. Many are also saying, what could you do with an open office hours, like a virtual help desk, that type of thing. So some communication doesn't always have to be email. And so if you're thinking about some of these strategies, I think you're right in line with many others. Thinking about the standards for communication, awareness, and things like that, policies, who should write, should we have more focused messaging around a couple things versus 5 emails per week. So again, the goal is not to provide a specific modality, but I would say that if you can combine email with a lot of other strategies, you'd be right on par with what other campuses are doing. All right, the third one, and this is going to be a broad one, communication. You can only say so much about that. It's more like just, hey, watch your strategies. I'm most excited about this one, this idea of seeking and sharing knowledge. And I think that resonates with the whole purpose of why we're here today. And so I want to introduce the last question that you all ask, and then I want to give you a different frame of how we might use data. And I'll own my bias and tell you that it's almost like they talk about 6 degrees of separation. You could give me almost any topic in higher education. I'm going to tell you that it relates to data and why you should use data to address it. So I just want to say that up front. These pictures, though, represent what I think in terms of the outcome of seeking and sharing knowledge. So to the left, you see these puzzle pieces. And I think that sharing and seeking knowledge will have that feeling that you're working on something and you want to connect with a colleague, and they truly might have the idea or the perspective that fills in the rest of the puzzle for you. That's a lot to put on a relationship between you and a colleague talking about something, but I do believe it helps. If you're the new person in your area or you're the tenured person in your area, there's something about the pieces of our work connecting together that I think makes a difference. And then lastly, the second picture is to be hopeful that we will at some point be back in person together again. That's what it will look like. But I also want to acknowledge it can happen in a virtual setting as well. All right, so this is going to be the backdrop for the 4th and final question I got from you all in advance. So NASPA, the same survey that we did, I mentioned those outcomes about what people seem to want and desire more out of the pandemic. We asked questions like, to what extent right now are you actually collaborating with other functional areas on the campus? And so 40%, 43%, over 40% said that they have no collaboration with financial aid. Now, that's interesting that student affairs professionals would say this. Some might say other than what they have to do, and maybe CARES Act funding changed that, but no collaboration, that's pretty stark. Out of 1,600 people all saying not so much. And then another 41% said no collaboration with the registrar. And you say, okay, I get that. Why would they have to collaborate with the registrar? I have a slide coming up about what I think you could do to actually make that a meaningful relationship on both fronts. But for right now, if you're looking at these slides and saying, oh, that's not us, we've done a better job, I want to say there's another relationship that oftentimes comes up with student affairs. And you probably could guess it. The number one partner on a campus that student affairs should work with that's frequently asked about, here it is. The last question: how do we get academic affairs to value student development theory and recognize the importance of our work in educating the whole student? This could be a whole keynote in and of itself. This could be a conversation of great magnitude. We could take hours and talk about this. This is an age-old question, a popular question, and a still relevant question. So whoever asked this, I would love to know who you are so we could talk more about this. Take me up on that offer. But this is what I want to say about this. The academic affairs, student affairs relationship will be one that continues to evolve. I've heard all types of framing of what those roles should be. I've heard all types of questions about what those roles should be. And I don't know that it is one single answer based on the campus that you're in and the type of goals that you have for your students. But what I can say is that there's this push going forward now about learning and where learning happens. And I think that student affairs has to be a part of that conversation because, again, if our main goals, though they could be expanded, are retention, persistence, and graduation toward the completion of a credential or a certificate of some type or possibly a degree, then I think there's an acknowledgement that learning happens everywhere. And so, with that in mind, I want to tell you about a project that's happening nationally and a movement I would probably say is happening nationally, and it's around the comprehensive learner record. And so, this idea is that campuses for a long time have said that students learn things inside the classroom and outside the classroom. Though on the inside the classroom side, we have formal ways of tracking that. We have assessments, we have grades, we have credit hours that we attach to that. The registrar manages that for us in a formal transcript that can then be shared with other places. In the co-curricular space, we have a lot of opportunity there. Co-curricular transcripts are not new. Badges are starting to take more momentum. E-portfolios are there, but I don't know that we've reached a point here where there's a synergy between academic affairs and student affairs about what learning gets populated in there, what learning frameworks. If the student went to a particular club meeting every Friday for a whole semester, surely they've learned something. What type of framework or rubric can we use to actually capture that learning, and how can we put it in a digital form such that it gets the same level of prestige and value as an actual academic transcript? And so this comprehensive learner record project is a way for institutions to use data from these records, populate them, and show to students and academic affairs partners and the registrar and student affairs professionals themselves the value and impact of engaging in out of classroom activities. And it's not exclusively just engagement and making friends and things of that sort, but actually, no, I actually learned a lot about conflict management. I have better communication skills. I'm a better problem solver. I have leadership abilities and things like that. And with the right framing and with the right methods by which we collect data and use the right frameworks, now we got something. And so these digital records actually are starting to take root. And so over 100 campuses worked with NASPA and ACRO, which is the Registrar and Admissions Officers Association, and NILOA. So NILOA is the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment. And we've helped over 100 institutions create digital records. Now, it's not a replacement of the actual academic transcript, but it's a supplement to it. So it could be any portfolio, it could be a digital badge, could be a co-curricular transcript. But the idea is that it has the actual seal of the registrar on it, and it actually uses the learning frameworks that faculty use to actually measure learning. And so that question of how do we get faculty to recognize student development theory, well, I think we start off by continuing the narrative about what things students can learn in co-curricular environments. With this caveat, I don't want to assert that every single out of classroom experience is going to contribute to great learning. If me and Dr. Howard and David all sit out on the lawn and talk about the current state of higher education for 2 hours, that was a great conversation, but doesn't need to actually be in an official record. But if the three of us actually go to a webinar series, a 4-part webinar series, where we have national leaders and experts talk with us about the future of higher education, and they give us reports to read, and we actually do breakout groups, we probably have learned something. And I think it's worth saying that we could capture that learning using the frameworks that academic affairs professionals would probably help us design or even give to us. We can then say that putting those learning outcomes in a digital record and giving that to students, they now have additional currency when they get ready to apply for a job or graduate. And so that same student who switched from biology to architecture, if they've gone to a particular seminar like that, they can say and truly curate their own learning journey in a way that I think would make our academic affairs partners pretty glad to engage with us. So I can tell you a whole lot more about that, but if you were to Google comprehensive learner record or you want to know more about it, I can tell you about the movement. It's been going pretty good. It's not a one size fits all approach, but I think it's an easy entry. Any conversation with academic affairs about learning outcomes, I think will be one well suited to what you're trying to do. All right. We are right at 45 minutes, and I really can't keep your attention for much longer. So we are now starting our descent. I got about probably 10 or 15 more minutes to share with you. This is the part where if I had a drum to tap and say this is the reveal of something that I think is a very practical approach here. I have created a data identity framework, and I'm making the case that we are all data people. Now, I'm not suggesting that we are all institutional researchers or that we're all data scientists, but I do want to say this. I think that all of us have 6 core abilities to varying degrees that when combined together make us great colleagues to work together. Now, when I say everybody has a data identity, you probably naturally look at research and analysis and think, okay, I haven't taken a stats class in this long, or actually I love stats, or I love doing different methodological work. But if you just have a knack for asking clear questions and you're able to formulate what the goal of a project is, curiosity and inquiry is part of your data identity. I'd say also in that same vein, if you've ever been in a meeting with somebody who handed you a report and had a lot of information in it and it was difficult to consume, but there's somebody else in the meeting who can clearly distill what the most important findings are, that communication and consultation ability, huge for your data identity. Same thing with campus context. If you've been on a campus for a long time, sometimes it's easy to assume that you've seen it all. In this case, it's actually a good thing. So I think Dr. Howard said, hey, I've been here less than 6 months. Campus context here is a great opportunity for someone to say, what have we tried before? I like that you're bringing in outside perspectives, but I know there's probably a lot of you here who've seen a lot of initiatives start and stop. And so if you have that campus context, that's a great thing to bring to the table. I know that any leader would appreciate that. Industry context, same could be said there. I love that you've invited me to come from a national perspective, but I know many of you probably have memberships to other organizations or you're part of national networks that help you talk about current issues. And then lastly, if you're in a leadership role, and that could be at any level, coordinator all the way up to AVP or even VP, you have some ability for strategy and planning. So what I'm trying to assert here is that these 6 pieces together make up your data identity. And when it comes to actually infusing student development theory into your daily work, being able to share and seek knowledge across these areas with each other will be pivotal. So imagine if you have just a knack for communication and consultation and you start to work with a colleague who's really, really good at analysis, you can do some really great work together. And rather than it be something where one single person is responsible for all of this, I think knowing where your strengths are can make a big difference. And so this is a lot of text. I'll just sum it up for you. Imagine if you had a salad and it was all these pieces. You got tomatoes, you got cucumbers, you got lettuce, you got carrots. It makes for a much more savory, delicious type of salad, as opposed to one single bowl that had nothing but tomatoes in it. I like tomatoes, but maybe not a whole bowl that size of tomatoes. The idea is that everybody has a part of one of those 6 areas. Some have more natural strengths, some have slightly less, but all of those together actually make for a really comprehensive team approach. And I think that the level at which you use different types of your identity will probably vary, but all of them together make a big difference. And so I'm encouraging us to think more broadly about what we offer in terms of our data knowledge. And it truly might be that you're an expert at industry context. When it comes to any topics related to student development theory, you just happen to have it. Maybe the area where you need to pair with somebody might be in the area of campus context. And I think that's actually okay. So just so you can see how it plays out, I know that I hit you with the 6 and it's like, oh, that sounds really good. Tell me more. Within the 6 areas, there are 4 sub areas. So I'll take out, for example, research and analysis. When I say research and analysis, it's natural for somebody to automatically think spreadsheets, pivot tables, regression analysis, tracking software. But within that, there's abilities to both do computations as well as select the right method. Shameless plug for qualitative methods. If you've been talking with students or having focus groups or anything like that, those are good ways to actually leverage your abilities there. Curiosity and inquiry, if you're just somebody who naturally knows who the stakeholders are on a campus with any issue, can't move forward with this without talking to the Black students who are here and have been participating in the Black Student Union, or a particular issue might be around timing of the library. And maybe you say, well, our student government would have the best insight about that. Or it might be a faculty issue, or it might be a data issue for which institutional research might have the best expertise. Something about knowing stakeholder impact is a big part of what you're trying to do. And then I'd say in the communication and consultation area, follow up and interpretation. Nothing like starting a great conversation, having a guest speaker come, but who after this meeting might be able to say, I want to get a group together. I want to talk with us about the types of things we can produce. What types of infographics can we develop? What types of planning meetings might we be able to hold? And so with that in mind, I won't read all of these to you. What I'm trying to suggest is that there's a little something for everybody. Between the 6 areas and the 4 subcomponents, there are 24 different elements of your data identity, and we all have something to offer. And so your knack might truly be in project management. You're a whiz at Asana or any particular planning thing where you can create Gantt charts. Somebody else might truly know news and events. They just happen to have time to read the Chronicle or Inside Higher Ed. And so you pair those 2 people together and you can truly put together a well-versed team, a balanced team in which our greatest challenges don't seem so daunting because of that. So I'm overselling this, but if you're like, I get it, Amelia, you want to say we all have a data identity. How does it all look in actuality? I have found 15 different combinations of those 2, so of those 6, so different combinations of 2. So I want to give you 3 examples. Imagine if you're somebody who has an ability in the area of research and analysis and communication. I would describe that as a role of curator. You're the person who could go into any room and say, here's the issue that we're trying to address right now. Here's why student development theory is going to be our approach. And here's the relevant data to show that these particular students need this type of approach. You can tell the story. You can interpret it for others. Imagine though, example number 2, you're someone who's just naturally able to ask clear questions and you have the campus context. You've been here 10 years. Now you're the connector. You know what the issue is, and you know who it impacts, and you know what's been done in the past. So you're naturally able to gather people together. We got to get this person from conduct to sit with this person in the registrar's office and this person from institutional research. Those are key roles. I can tell you there have been a lot of projects I've been a part of where I've seen them not progress as quickly because I don't want to say the wrong people were there, but there were a lot of other people who could have been there early on, and you just need to know who they were. There's a connector in this group of people, even on this call, that has a knack for that. And then the last one is somebody to keep us honest, the mission monitor, somebody who has an ability around strategy and planning and the campus conduct to say, as we get farther down this road, if we're applying Schlossberg's transition theory and we're doing that with a brand new data collection, where we're surveying all the students on campus, is this going to be closely connected to our mission? Are we getting too far off topic? And so these types of personas plus 12 more, I think, are a good way to frame out what we're going to plan to do in the future in student affairs, because we can't do everything. So with 9 minutes left to go, I want to look ahead. I got some things that I think I would love to share with you about the future. So I remember Dr. Howard, in the beginning of your framing, you said, hey, there's some things that are happening in student affairs in the future. And so about 9 months ago, NASPA formed a task force on the future of student affairs, specifically to talk about not just the next 2 years, but the next 5 years and maybe the next 10 years. And if we're thinking about it, what are going to be the themes that we feel like are going to be most at the top? And so we did 17 different focus groups with professionals who were VPs all the way down to the students who are still in a graduate prep program. And these are the topics that came up. The first is the sustainability of the profession. Unfortunately, a lot of people said this is hard work. It's demanding work, it's changing work, it's fast-paced work, it's uncertain work. I'm not sure if I want to stay at the role that I'm in right now, or do I want to do something that's maybe student affairs adjacent. Many others said, I love this work. I've never been in a more thriving environment, though it's stressful. I get to see every day the impact that I'm having on students. And so sustainability of the profession could be both in and out. I guess going back to Schlossberg, moving in and through, event or non-event. The next one is acceleration of online student affairs. I think more often than not, there were a lot of in-person only type delivery methods that I think will probably be hybrid going forward. Many campuses saying we're not going back to in-person only, we're going to do in-person as well as a virtual option. Student-focused topics can range from anything related to housing insecurity, food insecurity. It could be free speech, but the idea is that the future of student affairs professionals will likely be the leading voice on student-focused topics. That probably won't change. We will be seen as the experts on these areas, which brings great responsibility, but also great opportunity. And the last two are DEI-focused topics. It could be framed in the negative events that we have right now, or even the more positive benefits of having a more diverse workforce, a more diverse way of engaging with students, and a more diverse set of objectives in our campus mission. But either way, I think we're going to still see student affairs be the leader in that area. And then lastly, this idea around professional preparation and continuing education. Lots of discussions about what types of skill sets does one need to have to enter the field and stay in it and sustain a career. And so there's a lot more we can say about that. So I promised you all a revisiting of the original question, and it was, how do you recommend we integrate student development theory in our work? And so from here, I have some practical advice. I know before I said set clear goals, prioritize communication. The third thing be to seek and share knowledge from others. But if you really want to get tactical, there are 4 things that I think I would say, if you take nothing else away from this, I would say, remember the things to keep in mind about the appropriate models to apply. And if you're looking ahead into the future, these are 4 things that I think will help us all. Paying attention to campus, state, and federal policy. This is the time. I know that now more than ever, there are a lot of things happening in the legislative space, the regulatory space, at a state level that might impact your campus operations, at a federal level that might impact operations. For example, many had lobbied and hoped that we would get double Pell grant for students. I think we're going to see legislation that comes out. It's going to be an increase, but not at the level of doubling it, but probably a slight increase. If we know that, how does that impact our enrollment management strategy, for example? That's my second point. Enrollment management for a while has always been something that I think campuses would discuss in a team that might include your registrar, plus your IR professional, plus your enrollment manager, plus your budget person. It may be the cabinet. Student affairs right now, probably more integral than ever to enrollment management. We can't just get students in. We've got to figure out the services, the theories that we're going to use, the practices. And this is that time. I know that many student affairs divisions have an enrollment management function, but some do not. And if it's not part of that daily conversation, how do we do the work that we do for the purpose of keeping students and keeping them enrolled, then we've missed an opportunity. The third, new models of student development theory. And at the end, I have a book that I want to tell you about. That's like the one I told you is brand new. Because the old model, Schlossberg, has been around for a while. So has Bronfenbrenner. They've served us well. They're broad enough to be applicable. But one critique of student development theory is that it needs to evolve. Do we have new models for gender and sexuality? Do we have new models for political identity development, for example, or digital identity development? We need those. And then last, don't forget about your data identity. At the end of the day, I think many, many times in student affairs, we will be asked to show with evidence, be it qualitative or quantitative, the impact and value of our work. And I think that becomes less daunting when you realize you can do it with others and you can do it with the team. And the first step is to figure out what your strengths are and combine and pair those with others. And so those will be my 4 pieces of practical advice. And with that in mind, I got some additional resources to suggest to you here. The first is this book here. The one I have on my own shelf is this one. I did not write it, so it's not a shameless plug for something I've written, but it is Bonner and others who are doing this book called Square Pegs and Round Holes. And so it's a diverse approach to college student development theory. It takes the work of the traditional mainstay theories, 2 of which I share with you, and it builds out a more contemporary approach. So the issues of today in student development theory. So as you can see, it's a very, very thick book. It's a desk read. It's a resource to have. You could build a whole curriculum around that. If anybody's interested, I can definitely put you in touch with the authors and editors. It's a great resource. I've seen it, and I think it's going to be a mainstay going forward. The second is, if I've interested you in any aspect of student support redesign, this idea of having clear goals around student success, Achieving the Dream has a toolkit. It's a lengthy free resource, but in chapter 8, it has a data distribution strategy worksheet. Some of you will see that and be like, that's too much for me. Just the name alone, I'm not interested. But for those of you who are interested and would say, we want to actually design something across a strategy or across functions, they have a step-by-step guide for how to do that. And if your goal is to use data-informed approaches, that would be a good one. The third resource is this book. I mentioned enrollment management. This book, if you've heard of it, it looks kind of like this. It's called The Demographics and Demand for Higher Education. It's a Nathan Graw book. It's 2018, and I'm pretty sure Nathan Graw did not think back in 2018 that we were going to have a pandemic, but we got one. And so everything we've been talking about, enrollment management and demographics, is a great resource. I think it frames a lot about how we're going to be talking about the students who are coming, as well as the students who are leaving our doors. And then lastly, the NASPA Task Force on the Future of Student Affairs. Those very quick early themes that I shared with you, we're digging into those and more. And so we'll do a survey next month, and we'll hopefully get thousands of responses that will indicate to us what the future might hold. Again, I don't know that it will be largely surprising to you, but there'll be a couple things in there I think will catch your attention. So I promise this is my last slide. I have 2 quotes for you that I think might frame up all this stuff. There's 2 from a book that I have coming out this summer about one's data identity. And the first is that there are a lot of people who are in the same boat. Use it as an opportunity to build connections and keep the lines of communication open. We get to that point sometimes when we're afraid to ask for help and afraid to say it's not working. Try to reach out and get the help you might need. And that's one of my favorite quotes from some interviews that I did with professionals about how they use information with others. And that's Amanda Cuevas from Florida Atlantic. And then just to keep it all front and center, the invitation came to talk about student development theory, and Patrick Biddix at UT Knoxville said, some of the best data you'll ever gather is from conversations with students. A constant source of data for me is conversations with students, casual and informal, about how their day's going, their classes, and what you can do to make things better. And so I just really appreciate the invitation to come and talk with you about student development theory. It all centers around students, knowing that they're more diverse than ever, more interesting than ever, and our support is more critical now than ever. So I think I did that. I nailed this right there at 1:59. So I've got to stop sharing my screen now. I've lectured you all for a solid hour. I have no idea what's in the chat, but I'm hoping something will be there. Oh, I see 21 something. So this is one of those things that's difficult. You can't see your audience. And so David, how about we pause here and see if we have any questions that maybe you caught your eye, and I'll keep a track as well. But I think that wraps up the formal part. We got 15, 20 minutes for chatting.
There were 2 questions that got asked in the chat.
Okay.
The first one was, is there a pre-order opportunity for the forthcoming book yet?
Oh yes, that was it. I didn't even mention that. That was not a platform to say, hey, buy the book. Yes, there is. So I'll get the link and send it to David. You can pre-order it. If I've captured your interest, that would be great. Although you have seen the Cliff Notes version of a lot of it's in the book. What comes after that is a self-assessment. So if I've really got you interested, I put an assessment in there. If you're like, well, I actually don't know where my strengths are, what types of things would indicate that. I also make the case that regardless of what job description is out there, every single job description, I think, it's a bold claim, but almost every job description has some element of one of those 6 things. I can't tell you the number of jobs. So for instance, there was one for a Clary coordinator, so Clary compliance coordinator. If you look at the job description, it has something like able to effectively communicate and build teams across the campus, strategy and planning, and communication and consultation, using real-time data, research and analysis, experience in the field, industry context. So using this idea that everybody has an identity and something to offer, I think I try to make it practical for you. But yeah, I'll share the pre-order link with David. Thanks for whoever asked that. What else? Do we have another one?
Another question that came up, Dr. Parnell. What kind of badges go into these learner records?
Oh, it's a good one. So badges can go in a number of different directions. I've seen some go more compartmentalized type knowledge. So some campuses said, hey, we would love to have a whole badge around all the 6 main things you expect, or 5 or 6 things like critical thinking and communication and leadership. But for their campus, they might say, hey, we don't have enough staff to work on that. What if we start small? What if we just truly do a communications badge only? And so what they've done is they might say, we will work with the faculty and see what types of learning outcomes might come from, let's say, a debate class or a particular public speaking class. And then outside the classroom, it might be a particular club or activity. And so what their goal is to have the communications badge be built around a particular set of learning outcomes, which would probably come from either maybe AAC and use value rubrics, or perhaps another particular set of standards, or maybe they create their own with the faculty. So you can go in a lot of different directions. I'll give you the pros and cons. If you're asking because you're thinking about a badge, the pros are that you can dig straight into a specific competency and say, we want a communications badge, or we want a critical thinking badge. It can go in a different direction. I did have a campus that said they want to have an empathy badge, which gave me pause. I like the idea, but I couldn't see how they would actually make it practical. I'd love to see it. So one downside is that be clear about what the badge's utility might be for the student, because you want that badge to be digital and that they can actually attach it to maybe their LinkedIn profile. And when someone clicks on it, it opens up and expands to say, this student, A. Parnell, has the following learning abilities and objectives completed at this campus as evidenced by the following activities. So make sure there's something that's actually tangible that you can actually back up with some learning. The downside is that some would say, is there a single model? How do I know that the badge that's in communication from Northern Kentucky is equivalent to or as rigorous as the one from NASPA University? That depends. That's the same thing you would ask about a biology class. I don't know that the biology class at NASPA University is the same at ABC University. You just have to go with it. So I think the benefit is to attach it to certain learning outcomes. But if the singular question, which I've just answered in a very long-winded way, is how do they make the badge? You got a lot of opportunity. You can go very narrow in terms of specific skill set, or if you have more time and more, staff and partners, you can go even broader than that. So let me give you some examples. Borough of it's LaGuardia Community College. They have done one around career prep, career planning. And so their badge includes a lot of different modules. So maybe part interviewing, part mock interviewing. It might be real-time interviewing. It might be resume development, things like that. Things that they would check off to say, if you've gotten this career services or career building type thing, that works out really well. If you think maybe now that you hear more about badging, that's not quite it, I would encourage you to look at the University of Central Oklahoma. And they have what's called the Student Transformative Learning Record, or STLR, Stellar. They have done really cool stuff there. And their digital record is not necessarily a badge, but it does showcase how you can pick out certain learning outcomes and go broader from there. So thank you for the question. It's a good one.
So let me jump in right quick.
Yeah.
I think that's a good segue to a couple of things I wanted to bring to the group's attention. First of all, the partnership that we've been talking about with academic affairs, those are the type of examples of things that we need to be working at and looking at and building, right? And so as we move forward, one of the things that I'm going to be tasking the group to do is look at a strategic plan for our division. And it's going to incorporate things like that, like looking at other institutions of how they have connected their out of classroom experiences with partnerships with academic affairs. And that still doesn't change the bread and butter of what we do, right? Those are just additional things that we will say, those are the partnership opportunities that exist as a result of us working alongside academic affairs. We know for a fact that there are a variety of things that students benefit from. They don't necessarily receive a badge for, but we know that learning occurs. What we've been tasked to do is really now look at how we can provide real metrics that support what we've been saying about what we do, what we bring to the table. And so that's really so this is, like I said, a really good appetizer for a longer conversation about how we do that. I'll be authentic with you and say, I don't have a particular idea of what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. That's going to come from the collective intellectual property that exists on this stream, right? People are going to come with ideas and suggestions and things that we're currently doing, in addition to things that we can do, and we'll identify some key metrics and areas that we can deliver at student affairs. We're going to be tasked to do that as a division. No one's going to give us a roadmap for that. We're going to have to be the content experts when it comes to those types of things. And Dr. Parnell, I wanted you alluded to it just a little bit.
Mhm.
There were two groups you talked about. I'm going to ask you to speak about one, just because of my experience with working with them. I've been talking to them a lot about creating the best experience humanly possible. And I also have been talking about this idea of being a generalist when it comes to student affairs, right? That's going to be the new understanding. I was in higher ed probably 10 or 15 years before I got a full understanding of enrollment services and what they do. And what I'm saying as student affairs professionals, we can't stay in our little isolated groups. We have to be able to be broad in our thinking and be able to know all the services that are available within our division. So, but particularly, I want you to talk specifically about the work that Achieve the Dream does. And I don't know if everybody's familiar with Achieve the Dream. If you're not, and I know I saw Bob shaking his head, so he's kind of familiar with the group. But can you talk a little bit about the work they do
Mhm.
that is similar to some of the things that we've been doing, that we've been talking about with EAB, with some things that we're doing, which is somewhat similar to what Achieve the Dream is doing. They have a moonshot program that we've been working and thinking about. So just speak a little bit about the work that they do for the group.
Mhm. So I'm gonna get to that, but I think I want to frame it with with one other point that kind of doubles down on what you described about being generalist. And it does come up quite often for me when somebody says, I saw in the chat, I've got a chance to scroll back up, like, what's NASPA? You know, what does it stand for? That was a great question. I should have not assumed that everybody knew it. When someone says, what does NASPA do? I tend to use that generalist versus specialist analogy. So I'm going somewhere with this. I would say, let's say you had a hangnail, you know, on your toe, and it became very, very painful. You probably start off by going to your general physician and say, hey, something's going on with my toe. It hurts really, hurts really bad. They might say, here, take this medicine, that's it. Or they might say, go see a podiatrist or a specialist at that point. I think that NASPA is much more of a generalist association because we know that there are also specialist organizations that are in student affairs too. So in this case, let's say you work in a specialty area like advising, but it does still help to know, how does housing work or how does conduct work? And so I think we've already been exposed to this balance of generalists versus specialists within student affairs, but it's time to go one step bigger. So it's easy to be both a specialist within student affairs and a generalist within student affairs. But how do we go from being a specialist or generalist in student affairs to being a generalist in higher education, which requires us to then learn more about academic affairs and also enrollment management and IR and IT. And it framed very like, hey, go to school and stuff. It feels overwhelming. Like, hey, wait a minute, I'm an academic advisor. I don't know how it's going to take me to learn about mainframe systems. I don't know how the data warehouse works. What am I supposed to do with this? That's not to suggest that you need to learn all of that tomorrow. I think what's most important is to learn how the network of resources in a campus all fit together, which helps you be more of a specialist when you need to, but also more of a collaborator as a journalist if you have to. So with all that as a backdrop, I would say Achieving the Dream, they're not quite a membership association exclusively, but imagine an organization that is primarily focused on helping campuses. It started off a lot with two-year campuses, and they're branching out now. They do a lot more with tribal colleges and a lot more with some four-year institutions, but they're truly focused a lot on change management. And I think to sum it up in a similar way, I would say they started off many, many years back with a heavy emphasis on data, which is why I like them so much. But they said, hey, you got to have a data focused initiative, a data focused approach to this. But what if you're a campus that doesn't really know where to get started? So they started off by deploying a lot of data coaches. And so the coach would come and actually be with you on the campus and pull together people from a lot of different areas. So you might have enrollment management plus the faculty plus student affairs all together. And they would truly unpack and then retether a lot of your data focused initiatives so that now, again, achieving the dream, of course, the dream is to finish college, but you do it in a way that's very structured over time. And so I think they got out the gate early, and Achieving the Dream is not the only one. I happen to like them from their nonprofit perspective, but that's not a critique of EAB either. EAB is in that space. Inside Track has been in that same space. You got Civitas has been in the same space. I hesitate to do this if you put this out for. This is not an endorsement of any of these companies. But what I'm saying is it's not so much of trying to find the single specific resource, so much as it is the approach that you need for your campus. And if you're moving from specialist to generalist, any of them will probably get you there. But Achieving the Dream does a much more holistic change management approach. I would say that I've really appreciated being a part of.
And that's the focus. And the reason why I wanted you to hear from another person besides me is it's this whole concept of helping students navigate higher education. And it is what our new focus should be, right? And we've gone other days that we feel like our role is to engage students and create this great experience outside the classroom. we're also being asked to be responsible for making sure that when that student is admitted to the institution, that we help to navigate some of the tripwires, some of the barriers that exist. And we know what they are, like, because we've heard our students talk about the barriers that exist as they try to go through and walk through our campuses. How do we then use that knowledge? Talked about knowledge sharing, right? She spent a lot of time talking about the sharing of knowledge, sharing that information with other folks in the institution. These are the hurdles that contribute to why students don't return. Because at the end of the day, regardless of what you think, at the end of the day, we are a business. And our business is educating students. And our business is making sure that our ability to bring students in, have them be successful, graduate is what we're going to be measured by, right? Our ability to get people in and out of the institution and hopefully have a really great experience along the way. But we have to be able to, as a division, to support and understand what that looks like and be able to identify when things are tripwires and help the other side of the house understand. And I'm just talking about academic affairs, I'm talking about business and finance, I'm talking about all the other areas of the institution to figure out ways that we can help students maneuver through this process of higher education. So at the end of it, when it's all said and done, that we haven't inadvertently victimized our students by leaving them with a pound of debt that they can't ever be able to pay off, and then not even have the credentials to get a good job of what we promised. And I've said this 100 times, that's going to be our reckoning, right? If we continue to deliver an education without the ability to be gainfully employed, there's going to be a day of reckoning for higher education that we have to be able to answer. And that's everybody's responsibility. Doesn't matter where you work, is we have to understand the importance of our brand and what we bring to the table. And why is it important for us to invest in an institution like us in order to be able to, for students to spend their money to make work. So I'm going to allow for more questions. I know there are probably other folks that have questions, but I just wanted to set the table in regards to why this type of conversation is really critical.
I appreciate that. I think, I want to maybe come back to one of the earlier points I made about things to keep in mind. And one of them was about looking at not just outcomes, but needs and process also. Because it's so easy to want to toss a whole program out to the side or dismiss it as being ineffective, when in fact, it probably could be just as effective as it needs to be. It's just a product of how it was designed. And so maybe that particular tweak might just be, what if we change the days of delivery? What if we change the mode of delivery? Maybe these are processes. And if you talk with students and they say, I would have come or I would have taken advantage of it, but it was at the wrong time, or I wasn't able to find parking, things like that. That seem like small things, but those things could increase the student's experience, which then increases the outcomes and it works out fine. So I would say, when you're trying to make a data-informed decision, take your time, don't rush at it, but outcomes that are not where you want them to be may truly be the product of a need to pivot. Other times it might truly be your process design, or it might be an understanding of what the needs were that made you create in the first place. Joan, I think you asked if I was going to share the PowerPoint slides. Yes, I will. I'll save them as a PDF because the pictures make the file size larger, but you can have them, share them, swap them if you want. Bob, I saw you said you might actually email me a question, but I'm still here and I don't see any other questions in the bottom. So if you got a question, hopefully I didn't put you on the spot. If it's a hard question, then I don't know, email me.
It was an easy question, and actually David asked it already. It was about the pre-order information for your book, because I am one of those people. So I will be in touch, right. I imagine. So thank you.
We got that. It was a softball question about blueberries. I use blueberries as an example because I don't like blueberries at all. Really. And so I'm still working on my transition into liking them. Many have tried. I don't. But it's an analogy to talk about staged or phased type theories. And when you're trying to go to school on this stuff again, or remind yourself of theories, you'll find them being in different categories. One of which is, how does one go from unawareness to awareness to advocacy and all that stuff? I'm not at the advocacy level. I don't like it.
So I want to go real quick back to that analogy about blueberries. I posted we need to get everybody to try blueberries, right? Mm-hmm. And I hope you understood my thought process behind that. But we have a responsibility as a division to expose students to things that they would not have normally been exposed to, right? Mm-hmm. But we have to agree upon what those blueberries are, what the size of those blueberries are, which blueberries that we're going to give, and be intentional about getting folks to try those blueberries, if that makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. And so I know you understand what I'm talking about when I say blueberries. But we need to have, and that also is baked into our strategic plan, right? what are the blueberries that we feel that are so important for our students to walk away with when they graduate? And then we have to be cognizant of those, right? One of the ones that I've heard, and I'm brand new, and I've heard a bunch of you mention to me is there is this concept of respect that our students need to fully understand, right? And we need to have a conversation around respect as it relates to respect for others, respect for individuals and authority, respect for faculty, respect just in general. And I've heard a couple of conversations around, that's one of the things all of our students don't necessarily have is this sense of respect, or that sense of respect overall is slowly waning, right? And eventually we get to a place where there are more people that don't respect individuals who are administrators or other folks, other communities and things like that. So that's just one example, but I'm pretty sure there's other blueberries out there, right, that we want people to try in regards to their ability to, move through our campus and be exposed before they graduate.
I think it's an excellent example because other theories, talk about how a student might come in very closed on something, and it could be the product of how they were, coming into college from a previous environment. Say, hey, where I come from, I don't do that. I don't approach respect that way. You could easily get into some cultural differences too. The way that one might express visibly or vocally might say that's you showing self-respect or respect for others. Others might see that as being dismissive or even borderline disrespectful. So there's a lot of intersection here on any of the theories, which is why I say there's not a one size fits all approach. But I think that's a great exercise to go through, to say that the profile of a student who goes to NKU will probably have to have exposure and facilitated journey through some of the things that maybe they otherwise wouldn't have. That's how we emphasize the value of the college experience. I think some of it is going to create tension for the student or even some dissonance. I'm not used to engaging in this type of conversation. But that's where we get to be the educators. That term, student affairs educators, actually I think carries weight, and I think we've had it for a long time. I have a resource for you. I'm gonna try to put it in the chat. It is the self-authored, and if you saw me looking to the side, the self-authored integrated learning project at Northeastern University. It is, I think, one of the best I've seen. So this link won't get you to the actual resource, but you can read more about it. And so what they're trying, it's almost back to the connection of the same thing I was describing with these comprehensive learning records. So what they've described is that every student at Northeastern is going to have 5 domains of self-authored integrated learning. And it includes a lot of different things. Some of it includes like cultural compass, but they have boundary setting in there. Like, how do students learn how to set appropriate boundaries for themselves, for others, how to be self-aware enough of what their limitations might be. And so the idea is that these 5 components kind of work in tandem throughout the whole journey of the college student's experience. Some of it is led by student affairs, but some of it's academic affairs too. And it provides a nice frame. It's not gamified. So it's not that students are trying to earn points if they can get their boundary setting badge. That's not what it is. It's truly a framework that they would say students recognize at the beginning of when they come to campus, and it sticks with them throughout all of the things they do, whether they're inside or outside the classroom. And to that same point, Dr. Hart, about blueberries, it helps them kind of ground it and say, this is what I get to have as a result of going here. Because again, at some point, someone's going to say, that's a lot of money to spend on just this. But you say, no, it's an investment of a lot of money, which you get in return, all of that. And so back to those early questions when I said the current state of higher education, that those big questions, it all comes back to the same point here. But what I would encourage you to do is to keep this conversation going. Like, I know I saw in here somebody said they were going to send me an email or DM or chat. I gave you the buffet. I gave you a lot of things, and I hope I haven't overwhelmed you, because you're like, my goodness, are we talking about data? Are we talking about mental health? Are we talking about, yes, all of the things, all the things. But truly, this is one of the most challenging times to be in student affairs, but also one of the best and most opportunistic times to be in student affairs. I think we have a great amount of work ahead, but I don't know, just being able to connect with you all this way and knowing that you're going to continue these makes the work not seem so daunting. I know it sounds very optimistic, but my first slide said I was an optimist. That's my optimism showing. So we got 10 minutes. Other thoughts or questions?
The only thing I would add is this, is that once we identify what those are, if we come up with the model that's listed there, and we determine as a strategic plan that this is where we're going as a division, right? Then that means that everybody within the division wraps their mission and goals around these things, right? We can't, one example I give, I spent a great deal of time at the university, at Youngstown State University, developing what our plan was, and all of a sudden, and really very innocently, our program model within housing was totally different than anything we were doing, because someone felt like that was the direction that the unit needed to go, right? So I would just say this: once we agree upon what the overall learning outcomes are going to be, what our mission and our core values are going to be, then we're committed to that. Like, that becomes your housing program model, right? When we look at campus recreation, that becomes the things that you infuse into what you do within campus rec. That's what you do when you infuse programming within student engagement, right? We don't go out and invent something new that someone else has seen or someone else has saw at a conference and come back and bring it back. It's about, how does it fit into what we do, and how does that fit into what the president's asking us to do in regards to Sets by Design, right? So those are the types of things sometimes that we get off the track by creating an initiative that we've seen at somewhere else or this other place, or once we've agreed upon where we're going as an institution or division.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to make sure that that's, because that's going to be a collective conversation that we're all will be engaged in, and we'll all roll out. And then once it's done and completed, we just need to make sure all the programs we do, everything we do aligns there, because we have no chance of achieving the goal that we set if people are working in different or opposite of what the overall goals are.
Mm-hmm. I have a shameless plug of a suggestion here. I think that plan, it helps for consistency. It's funny. I think I did not share my slides with Dr. Howard before this, but the idea of setting clear goals that describes everything that you just described. Communicating effectively is essential, here. Within that second one, I would say don't forget about students, because as you design it along the way, that's your litmus test. Hey, this particular area of student affairs was designed to be approaching this particular goal for our strategy and mission. Is that what you've been experiencing? Does this feel like that same thing to you? And if it catches hold and people like it, I hope that same approach would be what faculty use, and that the registrar uses, and that others would say, is this what you're experiencing here? And if not, that's the best way to get it. Now, I'm not suggesting overburdening students with a bunch of surveys. That's not what I'm suggesting. I think you don't need to have every single student, respond to you in this way. But I think every so often, regular part of your data approach or your assessment of how you're doing, if you include students, they'll tell you pretty straightforward, as you know. They'll say, like, no, this is not what I'm experiencing. I didn't even know this is what you're working on. It's not clear for me. And I think we have to be okay with accepting critique if they say that. Now, the goal may not necessarily be to have students as the number one group to please, because they don't have the contextual pieces of the budget and all that kind of stuff. But if there are end consumer and there are end client, I think see if you can find a way to include a little bit of student feedback in there, other than student government, singularly, student government plus some of your non-student government students. With 7 minutes to go, should I yield the time for other announcements, or is there another question? Joan says, adapting is essential. Yes, Joan, adapting is essential in today's society. I'm adapting now, to just a lot of things, just in general. We're talking about the future of professional development a lot at NASPA. So I honestly, tell you the truth, I enjoy this more than I thought I would. It's not as easy. Like, if I'd been in front of you all at Northern Kentucky, by now I would have sat at your table. I would have been talking and swapping business cards. We would have been, doing a lot of one-on-one interacting. But I also get to see the value of the chat in real time. And so I would say adapting is, something we're all doing. I think we all are. I'm trying to, here. Let me put my email address in. I know I did not leave the last slide like I said I would, there with my email address. So write me sometime, anytime. I realize this was a spark to the conversation. It's not always easy in a public forum to ask your weediest questions or your biggest questions. But if you got questions or thoughts or ideas, things I've shared, resources that you want to, connect to, people you want to, talk more about in terms of out there in the field, let me know. Yeah, David, Dr. Howard, I hope this achieved what you
No,
hope.
this is good. Maybe we can give people 5 minutes back of their time. So thank you so much for your presentation today. David, do you want to talk about the next professional development that's coming up? And then Dr. Parnell, stay on after everyone. I just want to personally thank you as well for what you've done for us today, okay?
Will do.
Again, if we could all just express our appreciation to Dr. Parnell for being here today. Thank you so much. We really, really appreciate it. There are more professional development opportunities coming up soon. If you haven't seen them, they're posted on the Student Affairs website. You can find that at nku.edu/student affairs. Look under outreach for professional development. Our next professional development sessions will be on the Navigate tool that we use at NKU. That's specifically for student affairs staff. It'll happen on May 3rd, I believe, and May 5th. That's that Monday and Wednesday of that week. So we look forward to seeing everyone there. If you've got some colleagues that want to join us and they haven't signed up yet, have them email me. Everyone is welcome. If you need anything, please let us know. But thank you again, Dr. Parnell, for being here. Dr. Howard, thank you for sponsoring this session. I hope it was beneficial to everybody.
It was. Thank you so much.